Now that we have created the enumeration, let's click on the player and let's go inside of the player base. Now let's go back to the event graph here, and I'm going to drag this tab over to the side so it has a bit more structure, just like that. So for the event graph, for the first one, for example, for the crouch, let's go into the crouch function. Inside of here, you can see we are crouching and we're setting this boolean to crouch and not crouching. So we're going to make this system a bit more advanced so it can take multiple input. So let's go ahead and delete these booleans for now. And I'm going to drag this down so I have more space to work with. And let's create a new variable. For this variable, we're going to call it movement state. And for the variable type, instead of just making these default variables, you can also make variables of anything inside of the game. For example, you can make a variable out of the enumeration we just made. So if you just search for movement states, and you can see here, this is the enumeration I made. Just make sure you search for the name as you have written it for the file. So E movement states, you can see here, if I go back to the enumeration, it's called E movement states. So now I have this as a variable and I can click on compile. And you can see if I take a look here at the default value, now you can set the list item here for the enumeration. You can set it to one of these states. So if you're running, if you're walking, if you're crouching, and so on, and you can click and drag it into here and write set. And you can also see the enumeration here. You can set it to one of these list items. You can see this is very good. And we're also going to use it later on for the widgets when we're creating the UI. We can make a list of UI, for example, main menu, a pause menu, escape menu. We can make the in-game main UI and so on. So you can see you can make a list of anything, and it's really useful to use here. So instead of just having it like this as a standard variable, I want to give it multiple values. So you can see here, if I connect it and I want to walk instead of just crouching, you will set this variable to walking instead. However, this will just be like before. There isn't really a change. You're just setting it to walk and not walk, and you were setting it to crouch and not crouch. Now I want it to have multiple input. So what you want to do instead, I want to click on this, click on the type here of which variable type it should be, and I'm going to select an array instead of a single variable. Now, what an array is compared to a single variable, for the single variable, you're only able to set it to one value. And for example, if I set it to walking over in the walking, this will override this value that I have set here for the crouching. So for the array, you can imagine it as a box and you have multiple input inside of here. You can see if I compile and when you switch it into an array and you click on this plus here, you can see you can have multiple inputs. You can have the running, the walking, the crouching at the same time. So an array, you can imagine it as a box and you're putting all of these values inside of the box. However, if you have just a single standard variable, it's just one item you can set to either walking, crouching, and so on. But for the arrays, again, you can imagine it as a box and you're basically putting all these items inside of your box and you have all of these values stored for you. Another use for an array is, for example, which items do you have in your inventory? For example, you can have a sword, you can have a shield, and so on. So you can have multiple items inside of your inventory. And so you can see arrays are very nice for if you have multiple items that you want to store. So for now, let's delete everything here and let's compile. So for the crouching, let's drag this crouching into here. And what we want to use is if you drag, you can say set array element. So for the arrays, and if you don't know all of these functions, you can basically just drag from here and write array. I do that sometimes if there's something I forget or don't know about. You can write array and you can see all of the functions for the array. It can add, it can clear, it can find an item. So you're asking if it contains an item. You can find an item, you can get a specific item, you can ask if this array is empty and you can do something with it, and you can get the length of the array. So you can see we have a lot of functions that you can use for the array. The one we are going to use is called set array element. So we are going to set an item. Now you can also use this one if you drag and write add. For example, write add here and you can write the crouching. So when we are crouching, we're going to add the crouching to it, the item. However, this one is working great in single player, but I have a lot of issues with it in multiplayer. Sometimes it will not add, and I try to debug my code for hours, and it's actually just this one bugging out, nothing wrong with your code. So this one is really bad to use in multiplayer. It has a lot of bugs. So I'm going to delete it and use this one if you want to add items. Use this set array element instead. So go ahead and connect it. And what I want to set is when I'm going to crouch, I want to set the item to crouching. So I'm going basically what I'm doing here through code is when I click on crouch, I'm adding this crouch to my array. Okay, and go ahead and make sure you have deleted all the default values for now. So now we are setting the crouching. Now for the index, it just asks you where you want to set the crouching. So if you click on the array and you click on the plus, you can see you have an index number. And if I click on the plus again, you can see you have another index number. So arrays start at index 0, and the more items you add, it will increment. So it will be index 1, index 2, index 3, 4, 5, and so on. So it starts at index 0. It doesn't start at index 1. Very important to know. Now for the index, instead of just having it as 0, this will be a problem because if we take this and copy paste it into the walking, and we also set the walk to index 0, you can see here that it will overlap. So if I'm walking, let's say I just set it, or let's say I'm crouching here. I press the crouch and I'm going to delete all of the other ones. So this one I'm going to delete this as well as this one. So right now I'm crouching. It added the crouching to my index 0. Now if I click on the walking at the same time, it's going to overlap my crouching here, the crouching value, because it's going to set it to index 0. So instead of overlapping my values, what you can do is you can take from this and say last index. So it's going to take a look at what is your last index number. Right now, my last index number is 0. If I added these items, for example, like this, my last index would be 3. So it's going to find the last index, and you can take from this and say plus and add 1 to it like this, and then you can add it into the index. So what you're basically saying is find the last index number, so 3 for example, increment it by 1, and here is where you want to add this new value. So you're never overlapping your old movements. I'm going to delete all of this, compile, and now click on size to fit because this will basically make room for the new state you are going to add. Okay, now we have this here. Now for the uncrouch, if we don't want to crouch anymore, you can take this crouch state and you can drag from here and say remove, and you can choose this one called remove item, and you can connect it here. So when we're not crouching anymore, we basically want to remove the crouching from this item or from this array here. So when we are crouching, we're adding the item to the array to the last index plus 1, which means we're not overlapping the last item that we added, which maybe could be walking or running and so on. And then when we're not crouching anymore, we want to remove it from this array because we're not crouching anymore. Okay, let's compile and let's just copy paste all of this here, copy and paste it to the walking. So I'm going to delete the movement speed and the walk. We're going to add the movement speed later on, make it more clever as well. So delete all of this. Let's paste this code, connect it. And for this one, go ahead and select the walking instead. And if we're not walking anymore, we can take this and say remove item, just like before, and connect it, and you can remove the walking and go ahead and organize it a little bit more. All right, so we have the walking now. We're adding the walking. Just make sure you have the correct values for the walking and for the crouching as well. Crouching, crouching. So when we're crouching, we're going to add the item. And when we're walking, we're going to add the item as well. However, now for the running, we don't really have a place where we can add it. So for the running, what I want to do is I just want to add it by default. So if I click on the movement state, I want to click on the plus here, and I'm just going to add the running as the default because when I'm not walking or when I'm not crouching here and I'm not walking, I'm basically running around. So I just want to have this running movement state as default. And when I'm not crouching and walking, it will run automatically. So you can see here when I'm starting to walk, it will add this walk to the last index plus 1, which means 0 plus 1. So it will add the walking down here and it will never overlap my running movement state. So now that we have this finished, we're actually finished with this system. So you can see it's a little bit more advanced, but it is going to work a lot better than before. And you can see when we make an enumeration, we can reduce the amount of variables that we make, because now for the crouch, you can go ahead and click on delete and you can go ahead just delete this, and for the walking as well. So now you can see we only have one variable for the crouching and for the walking. And later on, if you want to create a sprint variable for your game, you can go ahead inside of the enumeration, add the sprint variable. And for the sprint, again, just like before, go ahead and make it a function for the sprint, like the crouch and the walking, and you can add the sprint just like that.